Hello again, it's Amy and Anastasia. They're in the back behind me. And I am going to talk to you in this recording about the art that leads up to the late medieval and early Renaissance period that we will be starting this class with officially. So I'm going to do a very brief overview of art up until the time of the late medieval period. So here we go. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Just one moment. All right. So as mentioned, right, I talked in the introductory session a little bit about how art is not created in a vacuum, and that this class starts with the late medieval and the early Renaissance. And it's worth knowing what came before in order to see why the Renaissance is a rebirth. Okay, so you need to know that art has always been around, right? It's not something that just spontaneously came to life with the Romans or the Greeks or whomever. Okay, it is something that is very deliberate, and it has been in existence for a very long time. So here you can see the entrance to the caves at Lascaux, Paleolithic, okay, so thousands of years old. And these are the cave paintings, right? And these are figurative depictions of wildlife and cattle and oxen and bulls, okay? And these are, again, thousands of years old. Art has been around for a very long time. And look how naturalistic these are. Okay, so also ancient Egypt, right? So this is something that is close to 5,000 years old, all right? Again, relatively naturalistic. You can see here these geese and ducks, okay? You have the Sphinx, which again is close to 5,000 years old. And this is not as naturalistic. It combines the face of the pharaoh with this body of a lion. But again, right, think about the labor that would have gone into the artworks that you're seeing here. Okay, so we're talking about massive pyramids, massive sphinx. So if you look at the measurements here on the right hand side, so this is all information about this specific image, and you can see that it's 65 feet tall and 240 feet long. So these are huge. Okay, and this is before the days of machinery and cranes like we're used to. So think about the sheer amount of labor that would go into making something like this. Okay, again, right, Egyptian. This one is more recent. It's only about 3,000 years old. And one thing that I want to point out is that with the art that we're looking at here, it says BCE, and the numbers decrease as we move forward in time. And that's because we have year zero. And if you look at my little picture here, I kind of have a zero, and then the farther away from zero that you get, the higher the numbers go. So the numbers start really high and then they shrink in BCE, which means before Common Era, until they hit basically that zero mark. And then from there, the numbers grow again. And this is known as CE, or Common Era. Okay, so the majority of work that we're looking at, aside from this very brief, like 5-minute discussion in this class, is going to be CE, so after the 0 point and moving forward to today. Okay, so again, just want to reiterate that you have these depictions that are quite refined and that art has very long histories. So where I'm going to be going into a little bit more detail is with classical art. So classical art starts with the Greeks, and this is from roughly 800 to 31 BCE. So again, remember how we have the zero and we're coming down from 800 towards zero, okay? So you have the geometric period. So this is around 800. And you can see here that this specific work is from 750 to 735 BCE. Again, the numbers go down the closer you get to our time. And if you look at this, you can see that it is very much geometric patterns. It's very angular, it's very mathematical, but if you look, you can see that these are humans, right? These are humanoid figures, even though torsos are simply triangles, right? So what you're looking at is a funeral, okay? So here is a body, and it is on this table, and it is being honored by these people on the sides, by these here. You probably have sacrifices down at the bottom. So again, we can read this as human, even though it is quite abstracted from what we're used to. And it's combined with these geometric patterns all over. So again, this is how you see a chariot depicted, okay? And look at all the legs of the horses. And these are shields being carried by men, but they kind of look like circles with legs and pieces eaten out of them, okay? So this is something that is about 2,750 years old, okay? And this is ceramic. So this is something that's really quite incredible. And ancient, very ancient. Okay, so this is the geometric period. And from the geometric period, we start to move into what's known as the archaic period. And this is a greater movement towards naturalism. And you can see the difference between the depiction of the human form here and this. So this is what is known as a kouros. This is a male youth. And they would be in these standing positions, and you can see that he's in the process of walking, but his legs are locked. And if you look at the musculature of this figure, okay, you can see that there's not much musculature. It is very minimal. Look at the hair, okay? The hair is not indicated in a very naturalistic way. You have these almond-shaped eyes that are blank and a very faint smile. So again, this is much more naturalistic, much more what we expect a human form to look like than the previous geometric period. But it's still not quite as naturalistic as might be expected, okay? So we have these more clear articulations of figures, right? We have three-dimensionality. So consider the way that this figure is depicted as lying down. He's placed on his side, his legs are kind of akimbo, okay? Very different from the three-dimensionality of this figure. But if you look, right, you can see how very flat he is. Look at how locked those legs are. Think about standing in that position. Do you keep your legs, your knees locked and your legs perfectly straight? Okay, so it's very stiff and somewhat unnatural. And again, this is another example of a kouros, and I'm going to go to the detailed view because I want to show you that this musculature, some of it is indicated in depth, but some of it is simply incised. So this is just a line that's been drawn in the stone to indicate his abdominal muscles. Okay, and again, you can see the very locked legs, and look at the similarity between the way the calf is depicted here and the way that the calf is depicted here, okay? So even though this is three-dimensional, you can really see the relation between these, okay? And then we start to move into the classical period. So this is 6th century BCE, which means that it's in the 500s. All right, and look at this musculature here. So it's more indicated under the surface. Okay, you can kind of see that here, and less incised. Okay, the face is less stiff. You have a bit of a smile, a faint smile there. Okay, so there's more facial expression, and we'll keep moving forward. So again, you can kind of see this evolution. All right, so this is how a kore and kouros were found. So kore is the female version here. And again, you can see that there is this stiffness, but there is some indication of drapery. Okay, you have geometric incising here. And this is how these figures would have been found. And something that's worth pointing out is that this figure, do you see how this is kind of reddish? These figures would have been very brightly painted. They would not be the white that we are used to. The reason that they are white is that this is made of marble, Okay, and throughout time, paint has been rubbed off because they're so old, right? These are about 2,500 years old. And so we can see this indication of paint, particularly where there is some depth in the marble, because paint has hidden in those crevices. Okay, so again, right, more core. All right, now, in the classical period, we have the Critios boy. So think about the core and the koros that we were just looking at. And then look at this figure. Look at the musculature. Look at how this is indicated under the skin. Okay, look at the belly button. Look how natural it is. Okay, so there's much more of a sense of musculature. You can see the clavicle here. And the face, the eyes are less almond shaped, and they would have had an inlay in the eyes. That's why they're so blank and staring. So an inlay would be like a piece of stone that would have gone inside those eyes that has since been lost. Okay, and look at the posture, look at the stance. So this is when we see the development of what's known as contrapposto. And contrapposto is a stance where you have 2 feet and one is stepping forward, but one leg is bent and you have your weight resting on one leg, the other leg. So your hip is popped out a little bit, and it's a much more naturalistic way of standing. Think about how you would stand naturally, normally. Okay, you probably might put like a hand on your hip, your other hip might kind of pop out to the side a little bit. And so there's this much more naturalistic depiction of how people would stand. Okay, understanding of anatomy. So again, just to show you that these figures would have been very brightly painted, these would have been very large. This is a reproduction so that you can kind of get a feel for what these figures might have looked like. And then as we go into the late archaic, early classical period, you have massively rapid advances in the naturalism of the figures that are depicted, okay? So this is from a temple. And what you're seeing here are 2 pieces from the temple. The first is made in roughly 500 BCE, and the bottom is made roughly 490 BCE. So there's 10 years of difference between them. And look at the difference. So this one is Western pediment. Okay, and that just means that it's on the western side of this temple. Okay, so look at this. So we have the musculature indicated under the skin like we've been talking about, but look at the hair, okay? It's still modeled in the same way that the Kuros hair was modeled, all right? It's not super naturalistic, and you still have this very frozen face with a small smile on his lips. So think about this. You are a soldier, okay? And that's what this individual is, and he is dying. Okay, both of these men are depicted as dying. And I should clarify that this right here, it looks like he's stabbing himself, but this is something that has been added later to support the hand, because as you can see, it's broken. And so the only way to put the hand in approximately the right position is to use this metal band. So just ignore this right here. Okay, but he has, again, this musculature in the calves, but his body, think about how a body might look as they're dying. Okay, look at how upright and stiff this is. He's supporting himself on one arm, he's smiling, but this man is dying. And a mere 10 years later, we have this willingness to contort the body in this way. And again, we have the musculature, you can see the sinews, everything in the legs, but he's twisted. You feel more of an agonizing death approaching, and he's propping himself up on his shield, which if you think about the having to prop yourself up, right? The shield might make more sense than just your arm. Okay, and this twisting, it's much more lifelike. The face has much more of an expression. It's less of this stiff, frozen mask-like smile. And only 10 years separates this. This is absolutely revolutionary. It's so fast. It's mind-blowing. Okay, And around this time, you have a canon written on the treatise of art by a man named Polykleitos. And here you can see the Parthenon. So this is the sort of temple that warriors like this would have been on, okay? And they would have been here in this triangular part that's now missing. So anyway, there's this canon written by Polykleitos, and he talks about how all parts of the sculpture should be in perfect proportion to each other. And they're starting to refine the measurements needed in order to depict a natural looking human being. Okay, so I'm just kind of going to go through again. This is the Parthenon. It's in Athens, and these are figures from the Parthenon. So this is from 438 to 432, so about 50 years after the dying soldier who's propping himself up on his shield. And look at how heavy, how bulky these figures are, and this sense of movement, okay? So this figure is like striding forward, and you can see the wind rippling on the garment. And this is what's known as wet drapery here. So you can see how it looks wet, and it's clinging to the flesh below the surface. Okay, and you can see these wrinkles. You can see all of this, and you can see the musculature indicated under the skin that is under this wet drapery. So again, this huge move towards naturalism. Okay, so again, very heavy, very weighty, very natural sort of poses, the drapery, okay? So very different from the choros and the chore that we have seen just recently, again with the musculature, okay? So this is only 50 years before, right? Think about how quickly this is changing. It's amazing, okay? So again, here's the face of the dying warrior. Okay, the smile, and here it's more agonized. The face is somewhat abstracted, but it is not this happy mask-like face. And then we move into the late classical and then eventually the Hellenistic period. And so this is a time when sculpture starts to become really naturalistic, but somewhat chaotic. Okay, so you have Alexander the Great, who sets out to conquer the world. And so you have some strife and war, okay? And there's greater emphasis on the humanity of these figures. So statues of frozen gods with frozen mask-like smiles are being replaced by human emotions that are much less idealized, okay? So this is a dying Gaul, and this is a Roman copy of an original Greek sculpture. But see how this dying individual is depicted, okay? You can empathize with this man. It's much easier to empathize with him than with either of these, right? You can clearly see the emotion, and you can almost feel his pain, maybe even hear his grunts, okay? So we're looking at this huge advancement towards naturalism. All right, and you have, again, these very heavy, weighty figures who are striding forward, and there's uncertainty, okay? You have the Venus de Milo, and it, like the paint that would have been applied to these sculptures would have been fully intact. The arms were broken on this figure, moving her into, I believe, France. Okay, so she was discovered and she had more of her arms intact. Okay, and then after Alexander the Great is defeated, you have this emphasis on drama and turmoil and just this emotion that it's just really struggling, and you can see in his face. So this is a depiction of Laocoon and his sons, and this is from the story of the Iliad. And this man has made a prediction that has angered the gods. And so they send serpents from the sea to come up and ensnare Laocoon and his sons. Okay, and so what you'll notice here is that we have this very large figure of Laocoon. Look at his musculature. You can really sense how he is straining here. You can see his veins bulging, the agony on his face. Okay, you have these very vicious serpents who are destroying him. And it's also worth noting that you have these much smaller figures of his sons, and they have very adult musculature, but they're much smaller. And part of that has to do with hierarchy, right? So Laocoon is the important figure in this story. And so he is larger than the other figures. And this is something that we'll see time and again. Okay, but again, this emphasis on theatricality and drama and just kind of like uncertainty, right? And let me go back to the slideshow. So we have portraits, and again, right, to show you what it might have looked like when it was painted. This is our best guess. And you have what's called the marble statue of an old woman or old market woman, okay? And this is no longer an idealized body. Think about the Koros that we were looking at with their perfect mask-like faces and their incised musculature. This is a woman who is past her prime. Her breasts are sagging. You can see her bones under her skin, right? She looks quite haggard. All right, time is wearing on this woman. This is no longer an idealized figure that is being displayed for the beauty of the body, okay? And you have this massive architecture like the Colosseum, an amphitheater, etc. Okay, so you have this emphasis on the human. So the importance of human rather than divine forces. Okay, and this is what's known as humanism, the human experience, naturalistic perspectives, and humans being potential, human beings' potential for achievement in all things. And then you have the Romans, and they are a democratic society. They have political checks and balances. And you see this emphasis more on old men, right? You see these portraits, and these are no longer idealized. This is a very naturalistic portrait. Okay, you can see the wrinkles and how craggy he is, and he's balding, he's losing his hair. And that's because there is a certain investment in the amount of experience that this man would have had to reach this age. Okay, so again, this movement towards humanism and away from idealizing. Okay. So this is Roman again, right? You can see that this bust is very naturalistic, and we're going to see a revival of this type of art in the Renaissance. So I'm going to stop showing you images for a moment because, or these images, I should say, because we're going to move into the Romanesque and the medieval time periods. And so what you need to understand is that in these time periods, these centuries, okay, religion is the central part of people's lives. So you are born and you immediately are baptized. So this is called the altarpiece of 7 sacraments. And someone mentioned in class the fact that you would have these massive altarpieces. Okay, so you can see the gold leaf that I was talking about here on the frame. All right, and this is Renaissance, this is 15th century, but I wanted to show this to you because it has the 7 sacraments. And so these are 7 important times in the life of the Catholic. And so what we're really going to be looking at in this time period is Catholicism. Okay, there is Orthodox Christianity because they split with Catholicism, but for the purposes of this class, we're going to be talking about Catholicism. And for all intents and purposes, this is the only religion in Europe at this time, in the areas that we're going to be looking at. So we are looking at, from the point of birth, the baby must be baptized. So the way that this works is the church is extremely powerful. It's massively powerful. And there's very little literacy in this time period. People are not able to read. And the church is important in all elements. There's this mortal fear of going to hell. Okay, and the church is the only thing that can keep you from going to hell. And so something like baptizing a baby right away is extremely important, because you are going to so for those of you who may be familiar with, say, Dante's Inferno, you have heaven, you have purgatory, and you have hell. So people who do bad things, who are not redeemed, go to hell. People who are good and have made mistakes and can eventually end up in heaven will go to heaven eventually, but they will spend a very long time in purgatory. And purgatory is not as awful as hell, but it's not someplace that you want to be stuck. And if a soul is not baptized, if this baby dies before it is baptized, it will go to purgatory and will not be able to go to heaven because it has not been saved. Okay? And think about things like mortality rates at this time, right? You would have babies dying a lot. Women would die in childbirth. So it's extremely important that you get baptized. So as we move forward, it's going to be increasingly important that you have an awareness of some amount of the biblical story, particularly the life of Christ. So if you read my introduction, you will notice that I said that I lack pretty much any and all artistic talent. So I have created a life of Christ image to share with you to help you understand a little bit better what these scenes are. So this is a narrative. And please do not think that this is me mocking this religion in any way. This is literally my artistic skill level. Okay, so this is the life of Christ. So Jesus Christ is the Savior in Catholic Church. And so what happens is there's something called the Annunciation. And this is where the angel Gabriel appears to the Virgin Mary. So Mary has never had sex. And Gabriel tells her, you're going to have a kid. And she's like, but I haven't had sex. And Gabriel's like, that's okay. God is going to give you this child and you will remain a virgin. And so she becomes pregnant. And she's quite young. She's probably 13 or so. And the man to whom she's engaged, named Joseph, he actually sticks with her even though she's pregnant. And so obviously she must have lost her virginity, right? She must have had sex with someone else. This would be incredibly shameful at the time, but he sticks with her. And they have to travel to his hometown, Joseph's hometown of Bethlehem, for a census, okay? So they go to Bethlehem and all the inns are full because there are a lot of people there to be counted for census. And so this is called the Nativity, and they end up having Jesus being born in a stable with animals, and shepherds come. So this is the shepherd with his sheep right here. And they come and they witness the birth of Christ, etc. And then the king of this area finds out about it. And one name for Jesus is King of the Jews, okay? Because Jesus, Mary, Joseph, they're all Jewish. And Herod is the king of the Jews in terms of social structure, royalty, etc. And so he does not want any competition. So he orders his soldiers to go and kill all baby boys who could potentially be Jesus, who's king of the Jews. And so Mary, Jesus, and Joseph go into Egypt on a donkey. This is a donkey. Yes, yes, I know it's atrocious. And then eventually they come back. Jesus grows up. He's baptized by his cousin, John the Baptist. And this is water. So baptism is the symbolic immersion of a body in water. And that indicates that they've been saved by Christ. And then John the Baptist is beheaded. So this is the beheading of John, and this is his body here and his head. And the reason that he's beheaded is that the queen is jealous of the power that John the Baptist has because he is a prophet. And so she sends her daughter Salome, who does this like sexy dance for the king. And the king's like, oh yeah, what do you want? I'll give you anything. And she's like, bring me the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And so John the Baptist gets beheaded, and then Salome gets the head. Okay, so then back to Jesus. He gathers 12 13 men, the disciples or apostles. He preaches and he performs miracles. And then he goes into Jerusalem. So again, this is a donkey, lots of donkeys in this story. And this is a triumphal entry. And so these are palm leaves and everyone's like, King of the Jews, yay, you've come to save us from wicked Herod, who's the guy who had all the babies killed. And then there's this Last Supper. And so Jesus and his disciples go and they consume a Last Supper. And he says that it's a Last Supper because one of you will betray me. And they're all like, what? No, not me, never. And then they go into the Garden of Gethsemane. And Judas identifies who Jesus is for the guards to capture him. And so Judas betrays Jesus by kissing him to identify him for the guards. So you can see he's got little lips there. Okay, and then Jesus is taken into custody and what's known as the Passion of the Christ. So he's tortured, he's whipped, he wears a crown of thorns, etc. He is eventually crucified, which is a particularly brutal way to die, where you are nailed to a cross of wood and left to suffocate, and he dies. He's buried, and everybody is very sad. And then 3 days later, he rises from the grave, and this is witnessed by his apostles, specifically 2 women, the Marys, and he rises from the grave and everyone's like, whoa! And not everyone believes it, and eventually he goes back into heaven. So that is the life of Christ, which we're going to be seeing a lot of in the next few weeks. So to come back to the slideshow, that was to give you an understanding of the viewpoint of the time. Okay, so going back a few hundred years, so we're looking at roughly 400, 450 CE. We're looking at Romanesque. Okay, so this is a baptistry. This is part of a church, and look how heavy and ponderous this is. Okay, and you have these mosaics of the Emperor Justinian, okay, and his wife Theodora, right? And there's a lack of naturalism. So think about what we were just looking at with, say, Laocoon and his sons, and the level of emotion and the extreme naturalism of the bodies. Okay, that's not something that we're seeing here, and that is intentional. So this is Byzantine, and we're going to start looking at, again, this is Romanesque. We're going to look at the Gothic icons and cathedrals, etc. So what is an icon? And again, I should have stated this before, I apologize. So I am operating on the assumption that not everyone is familiar with Catholicism and Christianity, which is why I provided the overview, etc. So some of you may already know this, but so this is an icon, and it is a depiction of the Virgin and Jesus. Okay, so as I mentioned, we have the Virgin Mary right here, who became the mother of Jesus through a miraculous impregnation. Okay, and so she's depicted here with Jesus. And look at how flat this image is. Okay, look at the way that they have portrayed Jesus's robes. Okay, how flat, and the drapery. So think about the drapery of, yes, the marble statue of an old woman, for instance, versus this, okay? And how much flatter and crisper this is. And the way that the icons would be used. So this in the background here, this is gold leaf, okay? So this would be expensive. And I want you to think about what it would look like to see this. So icons would be presented in a church. And icons typically depict the Virgin, or they might depict a saint. And basically, whoever is depicted in the icon acts as an intermediary for you to God. So you can pray to the saint depicted in the icon, and the saint or the Virgin Mary will bring your prayers before Jesus and God and present them, right? So this is a way of having your prayers accepted. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, so we're looking at these Gothic and Romanesque churches, okay? So look how massive these are. And even though the Gothic churches have a lot more windows than the Romanesque, all right, these are still going to be dark. They're lit by candles, okay? No electricity, no oil lamps, nothing like that, candles. So think about candlelight, right? It flickers, it's not still, it has spots of brightness and lots of darkness. And so think about what it would look like to see this depiction of a saint, of the Virgin Mary, of Jesus Christ. And they're covered in gold. So think about the way that the light would flicker on the gold, okay? And these would look like they had some element of life to them, like there was some movement embedded in these. And art is made at this time for the glorification of God. It is not made to express yourself artistically. It is not made to share your talents. It's made to glorify God. And nothing exemplifies that more than a cathedral. So I mentioned the pyramids, right? And the fact that these are so massive, and how much work it would have taken, and the lack of modern machinery. And excuse me, you're looking at the same thing here. So this is Notre Dame, which incredibly sadly burned last year. Okay, but look at how big it is. Look at the people here and how massive this is. And look, it was built in 1163 to 1330. Think about the level of work that this would take. Okay, and we don't know who created these. We don't know who painted these icons. These are works that are made to glorify God. Okay, so think of the sheer amount of religious devotion that it would take to create a work like this. And this is what's called a tympanum, or a portal. And this is a door down here, and you can see that there's all this sculpture. Okay, so these are not just flat buildings. These are incredibly intricate. And this is a rose window. This is all stained glass. So think about the technologies available in the 12th century, and think about what it would take in order to create something this massive and impressive, right? This is like 800 years old, okay? And these are all over Europe. Okay, so this is truly a labor of love and devotion. Okay, so coming back to icons, right? So think about seeing it in the context of that church, that example of devotion. And I mentioned that there's a lack of naturalism here that is a drastic change from the Roman and Greek sculptures that we were just looking at. And this is intentional. This is not, I don't know how to draw a female figure, and so I will just do the best that I can, and it's not very good. This is not the stick figure life of Christ that I have made. This is an intentional decision. Okay, so a couple of things. As I mentioned, literacy rates are very low. In 1475, in Western European countries, the literacy rate, or the ability to read, is below 20%. And in some cases, it's much lower. So the people who are able to read are nobility, royalty, and priests, okay? So think about what I told you about how important Jesus and the church and Catholicism is at this point, right? And your only way to be saved is to go to church and to participate, right? And to hear the Bible read to you by the priest. And so these images, these icons, they needed to have a way of communicating with the public and to inform them about certain stories for this illiterate public. Okay, cannot read. And there are specific guidelines that are in place. So think about how sacred these figures that are being depicted are, these objects are. Okay, so Jesus and Mary are human, but they are apart from someone like you or me, flesh and blood, right? They have this level of holiness that we cannot have. And so you do not want to depict them as fully human, right? So think about the sheer humanity, right? We talked a little bit about humanism of someone like this, right? Unidealized, lots of emotion, very naturalistic, aging. This is not a beautiful woman, but this is a very, very realistic portrait. And that's not what we are seeing here. So this is very intentional. And images had a larger role. So they served to remind viewers of the larger story. They serve to guide the viewer as well as embody and exalt that which is holy. They linked the past with the present, and they connected the worshiper to heaven. Okay, so something else that you'll notice is that the Jesus depicted in these is never quite what you would expect a baby or a toddler to look like. And that is intentional. Again, this is not a human baby, right? This is a divine baby. And so you see like this combination of a small body combined with this much older face. And now it looks almost disconcerting. But it indicated something very specific. It indicated who it was, that this is not someone who is of human origin, that this is someone who is apart. Right? And as I mentioned, this art could intercede for the person who is viewing it. And these works would actually have been touched and kissed, and they would act as a stand-in for the human saint or Mary or Jesus. And so you would touch these and you would kiss them, and it was a very tactile experience. Okay? So hopefully that makes some sense, and this will give you some grounding for understanding why the Renaissance is so revolutionary, because we go from this emphasis solely on the church and focusing solely on religious imagery, except for a few very notable exceptions, and this emphasis on the gold and the flatness. Oh, you know what? I'm going to share my screen once more because I wanted to point out, I mentioned in class the concept of blue and the expensiveness of the pigments, right? And so what you're looking at here is gold leaf combined with this very expensive blue, right? And so the more money that you put into these objects, the grander they are, the more it honors God. Okay, so this is a just like huge expression of devotion, right? So hopefully that provides you with some background. If you have questions, please let me know. And I will look forward to talking to you about the Italian Renaissance and late medieval period next.